Thank you. Thank you, Ed, and thank all of you for coming tonight. It's my honor, my pleasure, and especially to be in a distinguished science forum as the Kopriva lectures, and I'm very humbled by the invitation. Tonight, first of all, let me just start with the disclosures. So I did write these two books. I also want to mention that I am the chief science officer of a nonprofit called Eat Real, devoted to trying to change the global food supply from the bottom up by certifying restaurants, cafeterias, hospitals, schools that serve real food as an attempt to try to jumpstart and bring, shall we say, appropriate nutrition to the people who need it the most. And the other thing I am is the chief medical officer of a for-profit, as I've retired from UCSF clinically, called Slendine, where we're trying to mitigate the negative aspects of processed food in terms of health and disease. So those are my disclosures. They have nothing to do with this talk today. So tonight I have a very modest agenda. I hope by the end of the evening tonight that we will have solved the healthcare crisis, solved the Social Security crisis, solved the opioid crisis, solved the depression crisis, and perhaps most importantly, made America happy again. Now, these all sound like different phenomena. The point I'm going to try to make, the thesis I will try to pull together during the course of this lecture tonight, is the fact that these are actually 4 or 5 manifestations of a single crisis. And you can't solve a problem until you understand it. And that's what we're going to try to do tonight. Let's start with the healthcare crisis. Anybody know who this is? Familiar to anyone? Thank you. Zeke Emanuel, Rahm Emanuel's brother. He's a hematologist oncologist at the University of Pennsylvania. He is a bioethicist, and he is the architect of Obamacare. And in 2014, he penned this article in The Atlantic called "Why I Hope to Die at 75," because he needed to justify how Obamacare was going to work, and that basically 50% of the healthcare costs spent in this country are in the last month of life. And so why would you need healthcare after 75? Well, excuse me, but I don't plan on dying at 75. I plan on dying a whole lot later than that and being functional way past that point. And I really took umbrage with this article when it came out. And I will tell you that in this article and in the entire 1,000-page act, the Affordable Care Act, the word diet is not mentioned. Weight loss is mentioned, but diet is not mentioned. So my question to you is, did Obamacare deliver? President Obama promised that we could put 32 million sick people onto the rolls, and we would pay for this by providing preventative services. That is, by providing access to everyone so that everyone could see their doctor. We could keep people out of the emergency room. That was the goal. Okay? How well did it work? Well, we had this instead. The government can't make me buy health insurance, and why would I? Can I just go here and you'll pay for it? That's what we ended up with. In fact, after Obamacare was instituted, we actually saw an uptick in ER visits. Not a downturn, but an uptick. So much so, and because insurance companies were capped as to their profit, 3 of the insurers, the big insurers, Humana, United, and Aetna, actually left the exchanges, which ended up leading to the election of 2016, and you're all familiar with that. In fact, under Obamacare, the cost for diabetes went from 245 billion to 345 billion. That sure doesn't sound very preventative to me, does it? And under Trump care, we have this instead. This is Nick Mulvaney saying, Trump's budget director says, you brought this on yourself, so like the soup Nazi, no health care for you. The problem is, Obamacare, Trump care, and every other care on the planet ignores two very inconvenient truths. And these truths are, there is no medicalized prevention for chronic metabolic disease. It doesn't exist. There are no medicines for this. There's just long-term treatment. And I'll prove it to you. So here we have a meta-analysis of type 2 diabetes prevention strategies, both lifestyle on this side and drugs on this side. And what you see is, you see the diamond there and you see the straight line. So the diamond is to the left of the straight line for both diet and drugs, which means it's significant statistically. But that's missing the point of this slide, because what the number needed to treat right here is 25. That means that you have to institute preventative strategies on 25 people to prevent diabetes in one. Considering we have a 9.4% diabetes prevalence right now, and a 40% pre-diabetes prevalence, we have to basically treat everybody. And we won't even get anything out of it at 25 to 1. It doesn't work. It can't work. And the reason it can't work is because we've ignored the problem. The second inconvenient truth is you can't fix healthcare until you fix health, and you can't fix health until you fix diet. And you can't fix diet until you know what the hell is wrong. Well, this is what we were told was wrong. Everybody remember this Time magazine cover, 1984? So we did what they said. We went low fat, low cholesterol, lots of pasta. And we got this instead. We traded in one problem, which was actually, I mean, it was a problem, I'm not saying it wasn't a problem, but it was actually not that expensive a problem, into a problem that is enormously expensive and now affecting children. And this was from 2001, 6 million kids are seriously overweight. Well, with all of the nutritional knowledge, and I put that in quotes, with all of the obesity management programs, with all of the drugs on the market, and with Michelle Obama's vegetable gardens, we are now up to 24 million. Here's the reason. It's on this slide. How many of you watch football? Oh, come on, you can raise your hand. It's still socially acceptable today. In 2013, this TV commercial, a 2-minute TV commercial, aired on every single football game the entire year, sponsored by Coca-Cola, and this was called Coming Together, and this is a sentence straight from that video. Beating obesity will take action by all of us based on one simple common sense fact. All calories count no matter where they come from, including Coca-Cola and everything else with calories. So, you can get your calories from carrots, or you can get your calories from cheesecake, or you can get your calories from Coca-Cola, or you can get your calories from kumquats. Doesn't matter, because calories are fungible, because a calorie is a calorie. Therefore, it's about energy balance. Therefore, it's about calories in and calories out. Therefore, it is about two behaviors, gluttony and sloth. Therefore, if you're fat, it's your fault. Therefore, any calorie can be part of a balanced diet. Therefore, don't pick on our calories, go pick on somebody else's calories. All of that comes from this single mantra that a calorie is a calorie. And after all, it is common sense. Well, I don't believe in common sense. I believe in data. I believe in science. At UCSF, we have a motto: in God we trust, everyone else has to produce the data. Okay? We're hard asses. And it's a good thing we are. Okay? So who is saying this? Well, these guys here, and you recognize all of them. In fact, they control 90% of the world's food supply. And they're making a whole lot of money on it. And that's why they're saying it. So they say it's about calories. They say it's about obesity. Is that true? I'm going to give you 3 reasons to doubt that hypothesis. So on this slide, you see a scattergram of all the countries in the world. Obesity prevalence here on the x-axis, diabetes prevalence here on the y-axis. And you would look at this scattergram and you would say, well, Dr. Lustig, very clearly there is a correlation, and there it is. There is a correlation. I don't argue that. There is. But correlation is not concordance. They're not the same thing. Because there are countries that are obese without being diabetic, such as Iceland, Mongolia, Micronesia. And there are countries that are diabetic without being obese, such as India, Pakistan, and China. India and China today have an 11% diabetes rate, and they're not fat. We are the fattest nation on the planet. We have a 9.4% diabetes rate. If diabetes is because of obesity, how come they're more diabetic than us? Problem number 1. Problem number 2. Obesity is increasing worldwide by the amortized rate of 2.7% per year over the last 40 years. Yet diabetes is increasing worldwide at the amortized rate of 4.07% per year over those same 40 years. If diabetes was just a subset of the larger subgroup of obese persons, then how could you explain that? Well, you can't, because maybe it ain't true. Number 3, on this slide we have the secular trend in new incidence cases of type 2 diabetes in the American population over a 25-year period. And you can see that the increase is significant and going up. On this side we have the same data stratified by weight status. So here are the obese, here are the overweight, and here are the normal weight people. And what you'll notice is that there's been a 25% increase in the incidence of type 2 diabetes in the obese. But there's also been a 25% increase in incidence in the normal weight population as well. If diabetes is just a manifestation of obesity, how come the normal weight people are getting diabetic just as fast? Problem number 3. So this is the most important thing I'm going to teach you tonight. This is a Venn diagram of the entire United States population, 240 million adults. Got it? 30% obese, BMI over 30, 70% normal weight, BMI under 30. Everyone is in one of these 2 circles, and you know who you are. Okay? And they are mutually exclusive circles. Okay. The standard mantra from the doctors and the dietitians and the Surgeon General and the Institute of Medicine and the National Institutes of Health and the White House and Congress and the food industry is the following. 80% of that obese population, 80% of 30%, these 57 million people here, they're sick. They're sick. They're fat. And they're sick. And they're sick because they're fat. And if they would only just diet and exercise, we could solve this problem. That's what they say. Garbage. Complete trash. Sounds right. Common sense. Garbage. How come? It's on the slide. Anybody? Well, it is true that 80% of 30% are metabolically ill. I don't argue that. That is true. But that means that 20% of 30% are not. We have a name for these people. MHO, metabolically healthy obese. We study them to try to figure out how come they didn't get sick. Conversely, and this is the important thing, 40% of the normal weight population get the exact same diseases as do the obese for the exact same reason. They're just not obese. Normal weight people get type 2 diabetes, hypertension, lipid problems, heart disease, cancer, and dementia too. Now, they get it at a lower prevalence, 40% versus 80%. I don't argue that. Oh, clearly obesity is a risk factor. I don't argue that either, for sure. But risk factor and cause are not the same thing, because normal weight people get it too. And it's these thin sick people over here who are telling the fat sick people it's all their fault. And when you do the math, there's actually 67 million thin sick people compared to the 7 million fat sick people. There are more thin sick people than there are fat sick people. And when you do the math on the two of them together, it's more than half the US population, which makes this a public health crisis. And if thin people get it too, how can it be about behavior? This looks more like exposure. This looks like cholera or tuberculosis or influenza, where affected people and non-affected people live in the same house. So what's going on here? I will prove this to you. So, any radiologists in the room? Good, perfect. Okay, so here are one slice CT scans through the abdomen of two equally weighted people. Notice trunk fat. 12.8, 12.8, okay? One's healthy, one's sick. Which one's sick, A or B? I hear both. Can we have a consensus, please? B, thank you. B is the sick one. Why? A, he's just got big love handles, something to hold on to. B, he's got fat all around his organs, visceral fat. Big butt fat, big belly fat, if you will. Okay? And we have a name for this. It's called TOFI, T-O-F-I. Thin on the outside, fat on the inside, real medical term, 1,500 Medline citations. Go look it up. Coined by Dr. Jimmy Bell, University College London. So my question to you tonight is, are you a TOFI? How would you know? How could you know? Does your doctor know? And if your doctor knows, how come he hasn't told you? How could you figure it out? This is kind of important, isn't it? Yeah. And I'll prove it to you another way. So this is what we call an MRI fat fraction map. And this is a healthy obese person. Healthy. Metabolically healthy obese, MHO. Notice the big love handles, no problem there. But take a look at this guy's liver right there. Dark. 2.6% fat. This is normal. This is a metabolically healthy obese. Lots of sub-Q fat, very little liver fat. Now this is what you'd more normally expect to see. This is a patient with metabolic syndrome and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Here are the love handles, and take a look at that guy's liver. 24% liver fat. This is grade 3 hepatic steatosis on its way to fibrosis and cirrhosis and in need of a liver transplant. Now take a look at this guy. Thin. Notice no love handles. Take a look at his liver. 23% liver fat. This guy's just as sick as this guy. Thin sick, fat healthy. So which are you? So, in order to understand this, we have to understand a little bit of how we got here. So, we went low fat, right? We were told to reduce our fat consumption from 40% of calories to 30% of calories. And we sort of did it. In the process, we increased our carbohydrate consumption from 45% of calories to almost 60% of calories. And that is keeping protein constant. And as we did, our obesity went through the roof. And so did our diabetes. Okay? Turns out, that wasn't such good advice. This is a study that just got published last year called the Prospective Urban and Rural Epidemiology Study. It looks all over the world, different populations, looking at the percent of energy from fat, saturated fatty acids, monounsaturated fatty acids, polyunsaturated fatty acids, and carbohydrate, looking at total mortality and mortality from heart disease. And what you can see is that for every one of these fat categories, the curve is below the line, meaning the fat is protective. Total fat, saturated fat, monounsaturated fat, polyunsaturated fat. Protective. The only one where it's above the line is carbohydrate. We went low fat, which was high carbohydrate. Now, there are a lot of people who decry and are upset about red meat. And they may even have a point. I'm going to show you the data. So we're looking here at red meat, we're looking at poultry, we're looking at fish. And we're looking here at the hazard-risk ratio for type 2 diabetes. And what you'll notice is that red meat does have an effect. Consumption of red meat has an effect. However, when you factor out in these two models iron and heme intake, because after all, meat is muscle and muscle has iron and heme in it, the effect actually dissipates. And iron and heme are both oxidative stresses. And oxidative stress definitely can promote heart disease and diabetes. We don't argue that. But you'll notice, poultry, it goes away. And in fish, it goes away completely. So it might be that red meat is a bad actor. But it might not be because of the saturated fat, because if it was the saturated fat, then it wouldn't be adjusted when we take away the iron and the heme. So I want you to take a look at these three steaks. This is Italian steak right here. This is Argentinian steak. And here's USA, grade A, corn-fed beef. What do you see? You're on. Well, why don't these two steaks have that? Because they're corn-fed. These guys are grass-fed. Okay, the Argentinians from the Mendoza Valley, they got grass, they got place for the pasture, okay? You know, it used to take 18 months in this country to go from birth to slaughter. Today it takes 6 weeks. This is metabolic syndrome. The cow has metabolic syndrome. We just kill the cow before it gets sick. That's happening to you. Now, it's probably not because of the saturated fat, because the Argentinian beef is not a problem. In fact, the Argentines eat twice as much red meat as we do, and they have a lower incidence of heart disease. What it might be due to is what we call branched-chain amino acids, leucine, isoleucine, and valine, which are very high in corn and very low in grass. And it turns out when you consume branched-chain amino acids, if you need them for building muscle, so that's what's like in protein powder, like what bodybuilders take, to build muscle, well, then they're going to muscle, which is okay. But what if you're not a bodybuilder? What if you're a mere mortal like me? Okay? And you consume all this excess branched-chain amino acids. Body stores that stuff in muscle, but if you're not building muscle, where's it go? Goes to your liver. The liver takes the amino group off. It becomes an organic acid, enters the Krebs cycle in the liver cell, ends up overwhelming the mitochondria, and ends up being thrown off as liver fat. So branched-chain amino acids are actually associated with liver fat and insulin resistance through this pathway right here, making insulin resistance. In addition, Stanley Hazen at the Cleveland Clinic has found out that muscle, particularly American corn-fed beef, has a lot of a compound called choline. Now, you need choline. You need to make phosphatidylcholine for lipid export. You need to make acetylcholine for neurotransmission. So you need choline, okay? But we have a lot of it. And it turns out that bacteria in your intestine take excess choline and turn it into a compound called trimethylamine oxide, which then gets oxidized to something called TMAO, trimethylamine oxide, which is one of the stickiest, most inflammatory substances on the planet. And it's lining your arteries. And it might be that this is the reason for heart disease with red meat. In other words, what I'm saying is I'm not exonerating red meat as a promotive factor. What I'm saying is, it's probably not the saturated fat, as we've been told for the last 50 years. In fact, when you talk about saturated fat, there are really two saturated fats. There's red meat saturated fat, and then there's dairy saturated fat, butter. You've heard that butter's back, right? Well, here's the reason why they say it. Now, I'm not going to tell you butter's back or not. That's not the issue. The issue is that butter, or dairy saturated fat, is different from red meat saturated fat, because red meat saturated fat are even chain fatty acids, 16 and 18, palmitate and stearate, whereas dairy saturated fat are odd chain, 15 and 17, and they have a specific phospholipid signature that's been associated with heart disease and diabetes protection. And that's what this is diabetes protection with the fats involved with dairy. But when we got rid of saturated fat, we got rid of all of it. So we may have thrown the baby out with the bathwater, because there's not one saturated fat, there's two. How about surrogate markers? Everybody's familiar with this one called LDL. You've heard of it? Your doctor told you it's bad, right? Not really. Not so much. So here are a whole bunch of studies. It's a meta-analysis. And we're looking at the diamond again, and we're looking at whether or not it crosses one, and it doesn't cross one. So it is clinically significant, statistically significant. But the hazard-risk ratio here is at 1.3. The public health officials actually say 1.3 is the baseline for anything to actually be clinically relevant. So it just makes it at 1.3. If it was 1.29, they wouldn't even care, but it's 1.3. So why does everybody make such a big deal about LDL? Turns out, if you take the group of people who are most likely to get a heart attack, the people ages 30 to 60, and you take them out of the equation, and you look at the people from 60 to 95, turns out that LDL actually correlates with heart disease prevention, longevity. The higher your LDL, the better off you are. Now, how can that be if LDL is the bad guy? Turns out there's a much better marker, but we don't use it, and it's called triglycerides. There are two reasons we don't use triglycerides. The first is you have to get the specimen fasting, and everyone cheats. That's the first reason. Everybody had the cream cheese and the bagel and didn't tell the lab drawer. The second reason is because we figured out how to treat triglycerides 20 years after we figured out how to treat LDL. We treat LDL with statins, and now we're all on statins. It's statin nation. Triglycerides came, we had a drug that actually worked for triglycerides way later, so no one got on the bandwagon. Okay? But when you look at the data, the hazard risk ratio is 1.8. Remember, for LDL it was 1.3. For triglycerides it's 1.8. So what is that telling you? It's telling you that your triglycerides actually matter more than your LDL does. And here's the reason. So here are the different lipids in your bloodstream. Chylomicrons are what happens right after you eat a meal. They go straight to your liver and ultimately the fat comes off it and then gets diverted via the liver to something else. So VLDL is what your liver makes out of sugar and carbohydrate. VLDL is your liver carbohydrate turned into fat so it can be stored in the periphery, in your adipose tissue. LDL is your dietary fat rerouted in some fashion. And HDL is what happens to LDL after the fat has been offloaded. Okay? It's an evolutionary species. Turns out your LDL cholesterol is irrelevant. What's important is your LDL particle number. Imagine you had a box of Chips Ahoy cookies, okay? And they're different sizes. They're still the box. They're still in the box. But some of the Chips Ahoy cookies are huge and big, and some of them are really small. What if you just ate the small ones? Would you be any better off than if you ate a couple of large ones? Not really, no. Well, that's what this is. So if you look at the LDL cholesterol, it doesn't matter if your LDL cholesterol is low or high, okay? What matters is your LDL particle number. If your LDL particle number is low, then you survive. And if your particle number is high, you die. Because it's the little ones. It's the little ones, but there are more of them that matter. LDL particle number. So you say to me, well, why don't we measure that? And the answer is, because it's expensive. $500 instead of $25. That's why. And it's only done in research labs because they won't approve it for good laboratory practice because it's finicky from one place to another. Here's the problem on this slide. Here's LDL. Here's LDL. Here's HDL over here. Okay? So this is called pattern A LDL. Notice these globules are large. They're called large buoyant, pattern A. They're so large, they don't get under the surface of the arterial cell to start the plaque formation process. In addition, they're buoyant, they float. So laminar flow takes them through the capillaries and they come out the other end and don't do any damage. They are, for all intents and purposes, cardiovascularly neutral. And that's 80% of your LDL is type A. This guy down here is type B, small, dense LDL. Notice they're smaller. They can fit under the surface of the endothelial cells to start the plaque formation process. They're dense. They sink. And they get taken out of laminar flow and can actually make it underneath that endothelial cell to start the plaque formation process. And they're stickier, and they oxidize faster, which makes them more likely to lead to inflammation. So these are the bad guys. These guys, These are the ones you care about. Problem is, when you measure LDL, you're measuring both at the same time. So what are you going to do? So you have to have a way of figuring out, is your LDL the good guy or the bad guy, right? And there's a way to do that. You have to look at your triglycerides, the one that everyone ignores. That's the one that matters the most because it has the hazard risk ratio of 1.8. So here's pattern A LDL over here. And you have large buoyant LDLs over here, see? The way to figure it out is that you have low triglyceride, high HDL. Low triglyceride, high HDL. The triglyceride to HDL ratio tells you what you need to know. The higher it is, the worse you are. Over here you have pattern B. These are the small dense ones over here. High triglyceride, low HDL. So my question to you is, you may know your LDL level. Do you know your triglyceride level? If you don't, either your doctor didn't do his job or you didn't. One or the other. It's the pattern that matters, not the number. Now, how about randomized clinical trials? Well, we all went low fat. Guess what? The Women's Health Initiative showed us that there was no effect. No effect. Didn't matter. Reducing total fat did not change anything. In fact, randomized controlled trials of drugs and diet showed no overall benefit on mortality at all. And in fact, some of them didn't even reduce CVD events, and some of the drug studies, especially the statins, reported harm, like diabetes. And there's reason why statins can actually foment diabetes. So, every doctor comes to this with a bias. Every doctor has rose-colored glasses or blue-colored glasses or some colored glasses, okay? Because they were taught something in medical school, usually wrong. If you want to know what's really going on, you have to go someplace unbiased. So who's unbiased? The banks. Totally. The banks. Because they only have one goal: make money. They're unbelievably transparent. And they want to know what they should bank their money on. So they want the real data. They want to analyze the data properly without doctors getting in the way. And they did this. Credit Suisse Research Institute, Fat, the New Health Paradigm. And this is a direct quote from this 76-page report. And I had nothing to do with this. A high intake of omega-6 fats, vegetable oils, has not been proven as beneficial for our health, and trans fats have been shown to have negative health effects. The higher intake of vegetable oils and the increase in carbohydrate consumption in the last 30 to 40 years are the two leading factors behind the high rates of obesity and metabolic syndrome in the US. Saturated and monounsaturated fats are not. 100%. I completely agree with this. They got it right. And the reason they got it right was because they looked at the data without bias. Well, some doctors are coming on board. So this is an editorial that was written by my colleague Asim Malhotra, who's a member of the NHS Health Trust in the UK, along with Rita Redberg, who is a physician at UCSF and happens to be the editor-in-chief of JAMA Internal Medicine, and Pascal Meyer, who happens to be the editor-in-chief of BMJ Open Heart. Not exactly lightweights. And they published this editorial last year. Saturated fat does not clog the arteries. Coronary heart disease is a chronic inflammatory condition, the risk of which can be effectively reduced from healthy lifestyle interventions. Also 100% agree. And what did they target as those lifestyle interventions? Get rid of the excess fructose and refined carbohydrate. I completely 100% agree. That's processed food. Refined carbohydrates and sugar is processed food. In fact, Asim and I co-authored this along with Marianne Damasi, who's a researcher in Australia. The cholesterol and calorie hypotheses are both dead. It's time to focus on the real culprit, insulin resistance, which explains all of the problems. And the things that improve your insulin sensitivity improve your risk for diabetes and your risk for heart disease and your risk for every other one of those diseases. And I'll prove it to you. We did a study in children. We took 43 children out of our clinic at UCSF, metabolic syndrome, obesity plus at least one comorbidity, and they were all eating processed food and drinking sodas. That was normal. That was standard operating procedure. We studied them on their home diet. We figured out what they were eating, and what we did was we catered their meals for the next 9 days. No added sugar. We didn't give them funky food. We gave them, we bought it at Safeway, okay? It's real food. You can buy it too, okay? But it was no added sugar food. Now, if you remove the added sugar from these kids' diets, that would reduce their calorie intake by 350 to 400 calories a day, in which case they'd be in a caloric deficit, in which case they might lose weight, in which case people would say, well, of course they got better, they lost weight. So we didn't want them to lose weight. We wanted them to stay the same weight. So we had to substitute those 350 to 400 calories with something else that was calorically equivalent. We gave them starch, refined carbohydrate. We gave them starch. We took the pastries out, we put the bagels in. We took the sweetened yogurt out, we put the baked potato chips in. We took the chicken teriyaki out, we put the turkey hot dogs in. Everybody got it? So we didn't give them good food, we gave them crappy food. Gave them processed food. We gave them kid food. Food kids would eat, okay? But it was no added sugar food. 9 days. And we gave them a scale. And every day, they would go home, and we would call them up on the phone and say, what'd you weigh? And if they were losing weight, we said, eat more! We gave them extra, okay, to keep their weight stable for the whole 10-day interval. Okay? That's just this whole thing. And then we studied them again, did the same things. Every aspect of their metabolic health got better. All those red p-values, that's all improvement, okay? Everything got better. Their blood pressure went down by 5 points. Their blood glucose went down by 5 points. Their insulin went down 25%. Their glucose area under the curve on their insulin, their glucose tolerance test went down 8%. Everything got better. In particular, their lipids got better. Here's their glucose tolerance test. Here's that 8% reduction I just told you about. And here's their insulin response. This is an insulin resistance curve because it's not coming down because the body's not responding well to it, so it stays up. And now, on the same number of calories with no change in weight, it's now going down and it's, and it's clearing. That's insulin sensitivity. We also wanted to see what the liver was doing. Remember the liver fat? So we wanted to measure how fast was the liver making fat. So we gave them C13 labeled acetate to be incorporated into new fat making, palmitate. And here's how fast they were making fat. Got cut in half. And most importantly, the fat depots. So here's subcutaneous fat, no change, because we didn't let them lose weight, right? Big butt fat stayed the same. Here's visceral or big belly fat, down 7%, that's good. But take a look at their big liver fat, down 22%, with no change in calories and no change in weight. And as the liver fat went away, all of their metabolic parameters got better in association because their liver got better, because it's the liver fat that matters. In addition, remember those small dense LDLs are the bad guys? Here they are in red. See them? Now you see them. Now you don't. They disappeared after day 10. Okay, and their HDLs went up, which is good, right? There it is, went up. And all their lipids got better on the same number of calories with no change in weight. And their improvement in their lipids all correlated with their insulin improvement. So here's what happened. Fatty liver, notice the color, the LDL, that's the bad guy, the serum triglyceride. 9 days of sugar restriction, liver fat cleared, DNL down, VLDL down, and their insulin kinetics improved. We reversed their metabolic disease with no change in calories and no change in weight. Proof that a calorie is not a calorie. And guess what? We knew this 50 years ago. And it was deep sixed. It's been a put-up job all along. Who deep sixed it? The sugar industry. So this is a paper that my colleagues, Kristen Carnes, Laura Schmidt, and Stan Glantz published in 2016, where they actually found the paper trail of the communications between the Sugar Association and the Harvard School of Public Health, the chairman of nutrition, Fred Stair, and his assistant, Mark Hegstead, who became the head of the USDA. And they took $6,500, which would be $50,000 in today's dollars, to publish 2 articles in the New England Journal which singled out fat and cholesterol as the dietary causes of coronary heart disease and downplayed evidence that sucrose consumption was also a risk factor. The Sugar Research Foundation set the reviewer's objective, contributed articles for inclusion, and received drafts. The Sugar Research Foundation's funding and role was not disclosed. You've been hacked, all of you. Because what is hacking? It's propaganda. That's hacking. So what's the difference between marketing and propaganda? Marketing is using information to espouse your point of view. Propaganda is using disinformation to espouse your point of view. If you're being fed disinformation, you've been hacked. So, here is the increase in sugar consumption in the United States over the last 200 years. Our ancestors getting fruits and vegetables out of the ground with the occasional honey, about 4 pounds of sugar per year, no problem. Here's the growth of the sugar industry in Louisiana, Texas, Hawaii. Here's stabilization before World War II when price equaled demand, and here's the rationing of World War II right here, and it came back to the same level. And here's the advent of processed food, when we started taking the fat out of food, started taking the fiber out of food, and had to add the sugar back in. And then, of course, we added high fructose corn syrup, which was cheaper, so everything got it. Okay, so things that never had sugar before, now we're loaded with it, like ketchup. Okay? And here is the change in percent of GDP spent on health care over the same period of time. What do you see? We started eating processed food, we started getting sick. So let's do the math. Okay, this is a back of envelope calculation, but it holds. I've asked economists. The food industry grosses $1.4 trillion a year. That's a lot of money, of which $657 billion is gross profit. That's an annual gross profit margin of 45%. The next highest industry is pharma at 18%. Now, we all know pharma are thieves, but that's only 18%. This is 45%. What do you call them? Yet, healthcare costs in the United States total $3.2 trillion a year. Now, of that, 75% is chronic metabolic disease, the diseases we talked about. And of that, 75% of that could be prevented if we could just go back to rates that we saw in 1970, before the processed food debacle. So, that means that 75% of 3.2 trillion, or $1.8 trillion a year, is going down a rat hole. What do you think we could do with that 1.8 trillion, or even a fraction of it? Think we could healthcare for all? How about budget for all? Could we solve the budget? You could actually afford the tax break. The point is, we lose triple what the food industry makes, cleaning up their mess. This is unsustainable. And it's why Medicare is going broke, and Obamacare can't fix it, Trump care can't fix it, ain't nobody gonna fix it. Got it? We modeled what would happen to fatty liver disease, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, obesity, if we could reduce consumption of sugar in this country by 20%, which would be like a tax, like we have in San Francisco and Oakland and Philadelphia. You've heard about it, right? Sugar tax. Or 50% reduction, which would actually be adhering to what the USD guidelines said, which is 12 teaspoons of sugar per day at maximum. Okay? Right now we're at 18 teaspoons per day. Median. Everybody got it? And you can see we'd reduce a lot of disease. Now, on to Social Security. You know that Social Security is a Ponzi scheme, right? You know that. Ponzi scheme, right? The only difference between Social Security and Bernie Madoff is, with Bernie Madoff, you might have seen a return if you got in early enough. In order for Social Security to work, you need the young, healthy people here at the bottom paying in, so that the old, infirm, sick people up here at the top can take out. Right? But what happens if the young people at the bottom aren't healthy? What if they're not paying in? What if they're on disability? Worse yet, what if they're on dialysis and taking out? The entire base of the pyramid crumbles, which is exactly what we're seeing, and exactly why the Congressional Budget Office says that on the year 2029, we will have basically maxed out Social Security, and everyone will have to take a 29% cut. Now, I'll be honest with you. I'm going to be 72 in the year 2029, and I want my friggin' Social Security. And presumably you do too. But it won't be there for you. It will not be there for you. You paid in, and you will have lost it, just like Bernie. You okay with that? No. Again, let's talk to somebody who actually knows what's going on. Let's talk to the banks. This is from Morgan Stanley. Okay? And what they did was they modeled what economic growth in the United States would look like on the y-axis going forward by 20 years based on a low sugar case, which we don't have, stabilization at 2.9% growth, versus a high sugar case here in gold, which reaches 0.0% economic growth. Now, who is that good for? Is that even good for the food industry? That's not good for anybody, but that's what's going to happen. But maybe it won't matter because we'll all have floated away by then because of the climate change. Maybe that's what they're banking on. I don't know. So again, ask the banks. So this is from Credit Suisse also, Sugar Consumption at a Crossroads from 2013. And here's what they said. We believe higher taxation on sugary food and drinks would be the best option to reduce sugar intake and help fund the fast-growing healthcare costs associated with type 2 diabetes and obesity. A global investment bank is calling for taxation. Now, how effed up is that? I mean, really? They have one job, make money. But they're not going to make money because they see it. So they know something has to happen. Duh. So why is this all happening? Here's why. National Geographic knew why we can't resist it. Because, why? Because it's addictive. Because it's addictive. Now, there are a lot of people who don't believe that. But you know there are things that are addictive, right? So, we have an opioid crisis in this country. People are addicted all over the place, probably here in Montana too, right? Ohio is ground zero, but you know, it's everywhere. Trump declares opioid crisis a healthcare emergency but requests no funds. To which Jeff Sessions said people should just say no to opioids. Now, did Nancy Reagan's just say no work? Why didn't it work? Because that's the definition of addiction. Because you can have the knowledge that this substance is ruining your health, your life, your family, your community, your country, and you are powerless to do anything about it. That's the definition of addiction. So you can't just say no, because you're addicted. Duh. You don't have to believe me. I'm going to give you somebody you will believe. I'm going to give you a 30-second video, and you're going to go, oh. Everybody ready?
I couldn't get through a day without doing something to alter my consciousness.
And it started with heroin.
It started with sugar.
Sugar?
Oh yeah, when I was 5, 6 years old, I was cramming sugar down my throat as fast as I could get it down. Sweets, you know, sugar on bread and butter. I became addicted to sugar because it changed the way I felt.
That's Eric Clapton talking about how he got into heroin. Sugar is a gateway drug. Don't laugh. That's exactly what it is. It's a gateway drug. And more importantly, we now have early data in animals that the sugar that the mother eats gets across the placenta and actually changes food preferences in the mouse and rat newborns before they've been exposed to anything. So you may come out addicted, for all I know. So is there such a thing as food addiction, processed food addiction? Well, you know, the lay public seems to be getting it. The academics are a little slow on the uptake, but you know, people are saying, yeah, I mean, probably so. In fact, there's a whole textbook on food and addiction. So here's the question. Now we're at this point. In this country, we were promised 3 things. What were they? The clause everyone knows. Everyone on the planet knows one clause: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I would argue that all of our problems stem from the misinterpretation of this clause. So let's see how we're doing. How are we doing on life? What do you think? So here's life expectancy in the OECD countries. These are the 37 developed countries minus us. Continuing to go up. Here's us. Not so hot. Stabilization. Worse yet, look who's catching up. Niger, Ethiopia, Peru, Portugal, the Maldives, they're all getting better. We are getting worse. In fact, US life expectancy has declined now for 2 years in a row, for the first time. We've had little blips where 1 year compared to the other year, we went down a slight bit, but we've never gone down 2 years in a row, but we are now. Now, you say, wait a second, heart disease is getting better, which it is, but look at diabetes. And diabetes is what's killing us. And that's not the only thing killing us. Let's look at what's killing us. So here we have death rates in different countries. Here's France, Germany, UK, Canada, Australia, Sweden, all going down over time. Here's the US Hispanic population. They're actually doing pretty well. But look at who is not. US whites. US whites. What's going on with the US whites? What are they dying of? Poisonings and suicides. And chronic liver disease and diabetes. Poisonings and suicides. It's the opioid epidemic. In the 45 to 50-year-old age range. This is not good. Here's illicit drug use in the United States going up for illicit drugs. Here's marijuana. Here's, this one's prescription drugs, etc. Here's, which one's this? This is illicit drug use in older Americans, 50 to 64. Here we have overdose deaths from non-methadone opioids, fentanyl and heroin. Here's cocaine. Here's benzos. And the next one is particularly worrisome. Alcohol. Take a look at this. This is alcohol use disorder from 2001 to 2012. And you'll notice that there's been an increase, but boy, oh boy, look at an 83.7% increase in women. What are you ladies doing? And worse yet, it's not even the young women, it's the older women. What the hell? So, that's life. Now how about liberty? How are we doing on liberty? So this is a project at Harvard School of Economics called the Equality of Opportunity Project, run by Raj Chetty, a brilliant economist. And what they did was they looked at whether or not you were a prisoner of where you were born. So while you have the capacity to be able to move yourself, you can't move your station. It's like the caste system in India. So this is your salary compared to your parents' salary based on what county you were born in, adjusting for everything else. You got it? And what you see is that if you were born down here, you are making a whole lot less than your parents did. So let's get a little granular. Let's take someplace I know well, New York City. So over here we have the Bronx, and over here we have Bergen County. Okay? And we're looking now at the change in your salary compared to your parents based on whether you were born across the George Washington Bridge. And if you were born in the Bronx, you make 11% less than your parents did, controlling for everything. Controlling for race, education, health status, obesity, age, everything. Sex, gender, everything. Whereas if you were born in Bergen County, you're making 14% more. You say, well, wait, that's the poor people at the 25th percentile. But you know what? It holds up at the 75th percentile too. So we are prisoners of our own making based on where we were born. So here are the top 10 counties to be born in, and here are the bottom 10 counties to be born in. So the moral and the lesson of this slide is whatever you do, don't move to Baltimore. And finally, the pursuit of happiness. How are we doing there? Not so good. So here we have children's hospital admissions with the diagnosis of either suicidal ideation or self-harm up in the 12 to 17-year-old group significantly. And here's just encounters in the outpatient department, tripling in the span of 7 years. Triple the kids thinking about suicide coming into clinic. Now let's look at the deaths. So here we have total deaths in children ages 10 to 14. And you'll notice that motor vehicle accident deaths have gone down significantly because of improvements in transportation, because of airbags and crush zones and stuff like that, and also because the children aren't actually in the cars. Where are they? They're at home playing video games, getting depressed and committing suicide. In fact, suicides have now overtaken motor vehicle accidents as a cause of death in 10 to 14-year-olds. You okay with this? Here's antidepressant use in the United States. And you could say, well, that's us because, we now have Prozac. But the fact is, it's happening all over the world. 4.4% of the entire world is now clinically depressed, and 18.5% increase in prevalence in a decade. It's not just us. The whole world's depressed, and it's not Donald Trump. It came way before him. The point I'm trying to make, the thesis I'm trying to tie together for you is that I think that these four crises, the healthcare crisis, the social security crisis, the opioid crisis, and the depression crisis are actually one crisis, that we've been hacked. And the hack is on this slide. It is the systematic confusion and conflation of these two terms, pleasure and happiness. Now, who here can tell me the difference between those two terms? Pleasure is short-term, happiness is long-term. That's first. Okay, we got 6 more to go. Huh?
Pleasure is external, happiness is internal.
Good. So pleasure is visceral. You feel it in your body. Happiness is ethereal. You feel it above the neck. You're on a roll. Come on, let's have number 3. It's like Family Feud. Huh? Oh, we're getting, that's number 7. Oh, you can't jump the gun on me. I'm sorry.
I was like, how is she doing that? Is she a plant?
No. I don't know who she is, but she's smart. Pleasure is taking. Happiness is giving. Pleasure is experienced alone. Happiness is usually experienced in social groups. Pleasure is achievable with substances. Happiness is not achievable with substances. The extremes of pleasure, whether it be substances or behaviors, so substances like cocaine, heroin, nicotine, alcohol, sugar, or behaviors like shopping, gambling, internet, social media, porn, in the extreme, all lead to addiction. There's an aholic for every one of those. But there's no such thing as being addicted to too much happiness. And finally, number 7, as you called it, pleasure is dopamine and happiness is serotonin. So, 2 positive emotions, 2 emotions we value, treasure, try to achieve, pursue. Yes? But 2 neurotransmitters, 2 different areas of the brain, 2 different sets of receptors, 2 different mechanisms of action. So like you say, why do we care? Like, so what? I like them both. Here's why. The MRI shows that your brain has been hijacked by dopamine pirates. You are now under the full control of social media corporations, gambling casinos, and big pharma. Are you writing me a prescription? No, I'm buying stock in those companies. Here's why we care. Dopamine and serotonin are not the same. Dopamine is an excitatory neurotransmitter. When it's released from one neuron to the next in this area of the brain called the reward center or the nucleus accumbens, it excites the next neuron. Now, neurons like to be excited. That's why they have receptors in the first place. But neurons like to be tickled, not bludgeoned. Okay? Neurons are fragile. They die easy. Okay? You know that, like if you go underwater, you drown, but your brain goes first before the rest of you. You know that, right? Okay? Because your brain needs stuff more than the rest of your body does. Okay? Neurons die easy. Chronic excitation of any neuron can lead to neuronal cell death. Everybody got that? And we know that because of kids with chronic seizure disorders where we can't stop the seizures and it fries their neurons, and we know that on pathology. I have to take care of these, used to have to take care of these kids. So, to protect themselves, the dopamine receptor neurons, the second neuron, the receiving neuron, has a plan B. It has a fail-safe. It has a self-defense mechanism. What it does is it down-regulates the number of receptors so that it's less likely that any given molecule of dopamine will find a receptor. It's called the law of mass action. So, in human terms, in vernacular, you get a hit, you get a rush, The receptors go down. Then the next time you need a bigger hit to get the same rush, and the receptors go down, and then a bigger hit, and a bigger hit, and a bigger hit, and a bigger hit, until finally a huge hit to get nothing. That's called tolerance. And then when the neurons actually do start to die, that's called addiction. And when they die, they ain't coming back. Everybody got that? Here are the dopamine receptors in a control brain, and the red means there's lots of them. And here's in an addicted brain. Notice, way fewer. Okay? So this is just a cartoon. Okay, so here's a non-drug abuser, and there's lots of dopamine receptors here on the second neuron. And here's a drug abuser with way fewer. Everybody got the picture? Because the receptors have been downregulated in an attempt to try to salvage the neuron from dying. And it's true in obesity, too. So here's that same area of the brain, the nucleus accumbens, the reward center, and here's an obese person's brain. So they get less pleasure, less reward from the same amount of food because their dopamine receptors have been downregulated. Now, serotonin, on the other hand, is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. It does not make the next neuron fire. It actually puts the next neuron to rest. Now, if you're putting the next neuron to rest, do you have to downregulate the receptor? No. That would actually be counterproductive, wouldn't it? So you can't overdose on too much happiness because the receptors don't go down. But there's one thing that makes the serotonin go down. Dopamine. So the more pleasure you seek, the more unhappy you get. So here's the pathway. The ventral tegmental area, this is where the dopamine cell bodies are, and here's the nucleus accumbens, the reward center. And then there's this area over here, which is really important, right above your eyes, behind your forehead, called the prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal cortex is super important. Okay, we were talking about this today at MSU. Okay, here's the serotonin system. Notice a different area called the dorsal raphe, where the cell bodies are. And the entire brain is affected, especially that prefrontal cortex also. And the prefrontal cortex is in reciprocal relation between these two areas. And then finally, there's a third area called the stress-fear-memory pathway. Again, the prefrontal cortex is inhibiting these areas, the amygdala, which is the fear center. That's the area that goes bonkers when you're walking down a deserted alleyway at 3 in the morning. Okay? The hippocampus, which is where the memory of when you burned your hand on a hot stove at age 3 is kept. Okay? And here's the hypothalamus, which controls cortisol. Turns out cortisol puts that prefrontal cortex into suspended animation. That prefrontal cortex is the thing that's keeping your dopamine in check. So the more stress, the more dopamine. Now, that prefrontal cortex is right here. You can see that in the squirrel, monkey, and the cat, not so big. Okay, in the dog, a little bigger. And here in man, it's huge. Okay? This is what makes us us, is that prefrontal cortex. Otherwise, our brains are like everybody else, all the other animals. Okay? But it's our executive function, our ability to inhibit stupid things. Okay? The Jiminy Cricket part of your brain. Okay? Like Pinocchio, you know, the conscience that tells him not to do that stupid thing. Okay, that's the prefrontal cortex. And when it's not working, okay, you got a problem. And that's what all our kids have, is a problem. All that ADD, what do you think it is? It's a problem with this. So the prefrontal cortex does a whole bunch of things that are very, very important to normal functioning in our society. And I won't belabor this because we're, time. So I'm just going to show you here. This is a video of, here's the prefrontal cortex up here. It's going to run on a loop. And you can see that it's the last area to myelinate. And the problem is that myelinated neurons are preserved from being killed. It takes a lot more to kill them. Whereas unmyelinated axons are a lot easier to kill them. Think of it as the plastic coating around a copper wire. Okay? If you have the plastic coating, is it likely that you're going to short circuit? But what if the plastic isn't there? Same thing. Okay? In fact, you can see that there's an inverse association between obesity and prefrontal cortex in adults because that area is not doing its job. And it's allowing you to eat because you're getting, quote, reward. So here's addiction, excessive reward from too much dopamine, which downregulates its receptors, then throw some stress on, and you get diminution of pleasure. Here's depression, deficient contentment from not enough serotonin, and metabolic syndrome and all the things that basically go along with poor health, downregulate serotonin, then throw some stress on, which reduces the receptors for serotonin, and now you have diminution of happiness too. So turns out that addiction and depression are just two sides of the same coin. And here is what we have done to our environment. These 5 things: technology, processed food, sugar, sleep deprivation, and drugs. And they all do the same thing. They up your dopamine and they down your serotonin. This is what's wrong. And it's what's wrong for all 4 of those crises. Now, how did this hack happen? How did we get confused? I would argue that this has been industry-driven and government-sanctioned, that they knew what they were doing. It's been orchestrated, willful. Now, it's not a conspiracy, and the reason it's not a conspiracy is because a conspiracy would require collusion between industry actors. We have no data to support that. What it is it's a plot. And the reason it's a plot is because every single organization or company has figured out that this is the way to get you to buy more of their stuff. And then every other company who's in competition with them says, hey, they're devouring our market share, we got to do what they're doing. And so they've all basically figured it out for themselves and ratcheted it up, whether it be technology or drugs or sleep deprivation or anything else for that matter. So it's been engineered with a profit motive to basically steal everyone else's market share. And we are the subjects. We are the consumer. So here's an example. Everybody familiar with this, right? 10 years. The longest running campaign in the company's history. 10 years. 2005 to 2015. Open happiness. Any happiness in that bottle? Sugar, dopamine. Caffeine, dopamine. Caramel color, Salt, Phosphoric acid, carbonation, nope. Water. Any happiness in there? Nope. How about this one? The road to your happy place is paved with raisins and flakes and pavement. What's that saying? Saying, hey, if you're fat, it's your fault because you didn't exercise enough, right? And pavement. Now, see the Raisin Bran falling from the sky. My question to you is this Raisin Bran? Yes, no. I hear no. Why is this not Raisin Bran? Yeah, there you go. That's the Raisin Bran. 16 grams of sugar. Now, if you actually separate the raisins from the bran and count up how much sugar is in the raisins, the answer is 7 grams. So there's 9 grams of added sugar, coating the raisins to make them sweeter so you'll eat it. Okay? Now, if you go whole hog and you want to go, for the full Monty, then you'll buy the Raisin Bran Crunch at 29 grams of sugar, where sugar is the second ingredient. And you got brown sugar syrup, corn syrup, and honey, and also, I think, molasses over here, too. Okay. Everybody got the picture? All right. How about the Happy Meal? Not so happy. The good news is that there are fewer Happy Meals sold. The bad news is kids are ordering the dollar menu instead. And I think this is the next one's a video. No, not yet. Okay. How about Nestle? Okay, I know I'm focusing on food. We're going to get to the other things in a minute. So here's what Nestle has on their website, which is kind of cool. They say happiness and health are intimately linked together. The healthier you are, the happier you'll be, and vice versa. So here's my question. Does happiness translate into health? Yes or no? What do you think? Turns out, no. It doesn't. This is called the UK Million Women Study, where they actually looked at this question. And it turned out that poor health at baseline was strongly associated with unhappiness. But after adjustment for all the things and the treatments, it turned out it had no effect. What did have an effect were all of the hedonic behaviors associated with that unhappiness. So if you were so unhappy you started drinking or smoking or eating chocolate, then you had a problem with your health and with your longevity. It's the hedonic behaviors that contribute to the problem, not the unhappiness itself. Humans have been unhappy for millennia. But that didn't kill us. What killed us was what we did about it. So here's what Nestle said. This was from 2016, notice, right? Nestle wants to sell you both sugary snacks and diabetes pills. And when getting into the pharma business. Okay, but a new CEO came along. Before I get there, here's what they also said. Happiness comes from spending time with loved ones, fostering relationships, or learning how to cope with stress or depression. I agree. That's exactly right. They got that right. So the new CEO of Nestle, Mark Schneider, who came from the healthcare industry, actually this past month or 2 months ago, agreed to sell the US candy business to Ferrero Rocher, you know, the Nutella people, for $2.8 billion, because they want out of this, because they know this is not good. Yet, here's what they do in Brazil instead. They're going offshore, just like tobacco did. So this is a promotora, okay, with all Nestle packaged foods, high sugar, selling it in the favelas in Brazil. Okay? So, not so good. And finally, for this part, another video. It tends to be loud, so watch your ears. Oh, no, sorry, before that one. How about happy hour? You know, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, right? You know where it's 5 o'clock every day? It's 5 o'clock every day at 10 o'clock on NBC with Hoda and Kathy Lee drinking. It's called the Today Show Happy Hour, okay? And this is particularly egregious because Hoda is a breast cancer survivor. And alcohol has been shown to increase breast cancer recurrence. And maybe, just maybe, this is the reason that there's been an 83.7% increase in alcohol use disorder in women, is because they've been told they can. You okay with this? And finally, this is the most pernicious of all. Ready? Watch. Red Bull. Oh, Henry. Another candy bar, I don't know which one. Not done. Potato chips. If you are consuming Red Bull at midnight in South Central LA at a convenience store, you ain't happy. Think about it. How about stress? Remember? Let's add some stress to the reward, right? When the time comes, will you be ready? Now, how stressful is that? How about a little more stress? How about sleep deprivation? Okay? You know, everyone's sleep deprived now. Okay? And why? Is it the coffee or what? It's the technology. Okay? And we have this thing called tech addiction. In fact, Sean Parker, co-founder of Facebook, said, "We built Facebook to exploit you." Okay? Direct quote. Here it is. "We need to sort of give you a little dopamine hit every once in a while because someone liked or commented on a photo or a post or whatever." In fact, there's a whole company devoted to turning your app into an addictive one called Dopamine Labs. Now, what's the goal? Here's the goal. Everyone has habits. Those habits form because there's some reward associated with the habit. That's what makes it stick. Okay? But most people don't derive a whole lot of shall we say, pleasure, happiness, or otherwise from their habit, like twirling their hair, or biting their nails or whatever, okay? What makes a habit a problem, an addictive one, is this cycle. So you start with a trigger, like for instance, your emails going off in your pocket, which then leads to an action, which is checking your emails. And that action has to be socially acceptable at the present time, which it is today. I'm trying to fix that. Which then leads to, and this is the most important part to make it addictive, variable reward. It can't be the same reward every time. If it's the same reward every time, then it's, I mean, like, do you check your GPS? Like, you just check it once, it's done, right? Okay? Do you keep going back? But what about your emails? What about Groupon or Overstock? They're designed. How about when you try to book a plane with the airlines online? Did you ever notice? You come back 10 minutes later after you've checked your calendar and checked with your wife, and the prices have gone up, $250. Okay? Why do you think that is? I'll prove it to you. How many of you use Gmail? Yeah, a lot of you, because it's free, right? Yeah, I know. Yeah, I use it too. just so you know. All right. Have you ever noticed that it takes 1.5 seconds for the new emails to populate your screen? That's the dopamine hit. That's been baked in on purpose to keep it addictive. That's an example of this process. And then, of course, that leads to investment, which is the only thing that companies really care about, is that you're willing to plunk down another $1,000 on an iPhone. In fact, iPhones and children are a toxic pair, say Apple investors. Zuckerberg's dilemma when Facebook's success is bad for society. Indeed. In fact, Zuckerberg wants to show that the world can still be a positive force in people's lives, or at least it's truly trying to be. He says Facebook is the most amazing connectivity, which it is. But connectivity is not connection. Big difference. In fact, what he says is, well, depressed people use Facebook because they're looking for social validation, and they can't get it any other way, which is undoubtedly true, but he is missing half the story. Indeed, if you do time lag analysis on people who are depressed or not depressed, if they're depressed, they get more depressed, which is true after 2 weeks of Facebook, but even if they're not depressed, they get more depressed. Everyone gets more depressed. He's not telling you about that, and we have causation on that. That's not by accident, okay? Life satisfaction goes down the tubes. And by prioritizing content that sparks conversation with friends, Facebook could risk promoting more polarizing and opinionated posts that generate lots of comments, only adding to the filter bubble. Because the filter bubble is dopamine. What do you think's going on? What do you think Fox News is? It's validation of your own thoughts over and over again. So this is Tristan Harris, who used to work at Google, actually is responsible for that 1.5 second Gmail delay, so he knows what it is, because he did it. And he has actually left the company and started a nonprofit called the Center for Humane Technology to try to get software developers to take this issue and problem into account. Because we're not going to reverse from technology, but we can certainly make technology safer. For the last 10 years, it's been the Wild West. And the fact is, the Wild West needed to be reined in. Ultimately, every new industry needs to be reined in at some point, and it's time for this to go as well. So have smartphones destroyed a generation? Jean Twenge at UC San Diego has looked at the data and the analysis and says, yes, it has. It has destroyed a generation. And Common Sense Media with Center for Humane Technology actually sponsored a conference in DC a month ago, yesterday, on technology addiction, and I talked about this whole issue, and I am an advisor to both of these organizations. So here we are, technology, processed food, sugar, lack of sleep, drugs. Add some stress, and you got the whole enchilada. So in summary, we're not quite done yet, but we're getting there. Reward is not contentment, pleasure is not happiness. Reward is dopamine, contentment is serotonin. Long-term excess reward interferes with contentment. Chronic stress drives reward at the expense of contentment. Business has intentionally conflated the two terms, pleasure and happiness, specifically to get you to buy its junk, because they say, you're unhappy, buy this, and we believe them. And then when it doesn't work, we go, oh, it's us. Or engage in hedonic behaviors that are profitable to them. That's why we are consumers. Government legislation and Supreme Court decisions have made it easier to buy that junk or engage in those behaviors, and there are specific Supreme Court decisions that were all 5-4 that led to this. And individuals in society have become fat, sick, stupid, broke, addicted, depressed, and most decidedly unhappy. So, what can we do? Are we screwed? Is there anything we can do? The answer is yes, there is. You can do something for yourself and your family. That's all you can do right now, for yourself and your family. We're going to need societal intervention to fix society, but at least for yourself and your family. They're called the 4 C's, and they're all evidence-based. They're all clinically proven with neuroscience and, empiric outcome data to up your serotonin, tamp down your dopamine, and lower your cortisol, or your money back. But none of them cost anything, so don't expect a refund. They're all things your mother taught you, which you have forgotten. They are, in order, connect. Now, connect does not mean Facebook. Connect means interpersonal, eye-to-eye, face-to-face connection, looking someone in the eye. Why do you have to look someone in the eye? Because you have a set of neurons in the back of your head called mirror neurons, which transduce the facial expressions of the person you're talking to in real time and interpret that as the emotions that that person is generating, and you adopt those emotions yourself. It's a process we have a name for. It's called empathy. And if you can't do it, you are a psychopath. Got it? Think, okay? Empathy. So, Paul Ekman, famous psychologist at UC Berkeley, went to Papua New Guinea. They'd never seen a white person in their lives. They had the same facial expressions for the same emotions that we do. Where'd they get them from? They learn them from us? No. It's baked in, okay? It's part of our DNA. Everyone uses the same emotions for the same facial expressions for the same emotions. So you're getting that information and you're processing it and turning it into serotonin. Okay? Religion is a great way to explain this issue because religion's dopamine and serotonin. So there are 4,200 religions on the planet. How come so many? Because any of them work? I don't know. You tell me. Why are there so many religions on the planet? Every religion has one thing in common, and that's it. Community. A meeting place. A place where you meet and greet and commune with other people. The serotonin. Turns out what the religion espouses is the dopamine. And we know that because when we started treating Parkinson's patients back in the early 70s with L-Dopa, the precursor to dopamine, because they have a dopamine problem in a different part of the brain called the substantia nigra, which leads to motor problems, we started giving them L-Dopa, and they would get better from their motor dysfunction, and we still give them, dopamine precursors today. But back then, when we didn't know what the dose was, there's an entire literature on a sizable percentage of these people becoming compulsive gamblers and religious zealots. Anybody see the movie Awakenings? That's it. That's what happened. Okay? So that's the dopamine. And dopamine leads to zealotry. Serotonin leads to community. And religion is both. So, face-to-face connection, that's empathy, and you need that for serotonin. Yet social media generates dopamine because of that filter bubble. And Facebook, again, leads to social isolation and depression. Sherry Turkle at MIT said that we are now alone together. That's exactly right. We are all alone together. That is not a good way to be. That's a good way to get depressed. Number 2, contribute. And this does not mean to your bank account. This means outside of yourself. This is Rick Warren's The Purpose-Driven Life, as an example. Okay? Padding your bank account does not work. It's not contributing. And lottery winners are not happy. And those who value financial success actually derive less contentment. Saving rather than spending actually increases happiness and contentment. And if you spend the money on yourself, you get pleasure and makes you a consumer. If you spend it on others, it makes you an individual and you get happiness. And there's actually data on that. Can you derive happiness from work? Everyone wants to know. Can't I get this from work? And the answer is yes, you can, if 2 criteria are met. You can see your work helping others and your boss can see it too. Then you can get happiness from work. But what if you can't? What if that's not your working situation? Well, then you have to find other ways. Altruism, volunteerism, philanthropy. You can pay somebody else to do it for you. Okay? Anything that contributes to the greater good outside of yourself that you're not getting the Boy Scout badge for will work. Number 3, cope. Okay? And that means 3 things: sleep, mindfulness, and exercise. Everyone's sleep deprived. 35% of Americans get less than 7 hours of sleep, and 23% suffer from clinical insomnia. Some of those people have obstructive sleep apnea, which only makes it worse. And they then, take caffeine to reduce their sleep and increase their dopamine, which only actually foments the problem and makes it worse. And I will tell you that Dr. Dratz and I had about 6 cups this morning. The buzzword of the millennium, multitasking. You can't get a job if you're not a multitasker nowadays, right? Except for one thing. Only 2.5% of the population can actually do it. Everybody else is serially unitasking. And every time you switch from one task to the other, guess what? You get a hit of cortisol. That's stress. Okay? Which only makes you more and more unhappy. And you can overload anybody. Pilots are the ultimate multitaskers. They actually can multitask. You can even overload a pilot, okay, if you give them enough tasks. And you can actually see their serotonin in their brain fall. They've done it with, serotonin radionuclides. You can see it on PET scanning. Okay? Screens are the antithesis of sleep. This blue light actually keeps you up because it's telling your midbrain it's still light out. Okay, so it affects your melatonin. Kids who charge their cell phone in their room at night get 28 minutes less sleep than those who charge their phones outside their room. And smartphone apps for wellness have not yet shown benefit. Mindfulness activates the prefrontal cortex. So when you concentrate on a single task, that's exercising your prefrontal cortex. That's basically getting rid of all the noise. That's executive functioning. So you exercise your body, you need to exercise your prefrontal cortex. So mindfulness is the way to do that. And so it's now been shown to actually have effects on health. And exercise is as good as SSRIs at alleviating depression. And if you combine mindfulness plus exercise, you can actually reverse depression completely without drugs. And finally, our next president, cook. So it turns out there is a phenomenon called reward eating drive. So you can give somebody a full plate of food, have them completely not hungry, and they'll still eat based on whether their dopamine is working. And you can actually antagonize that with an opiate antagonist, naltrexone. We actually have done this and shown this reward eating drive associates with obesity and metabolic syndrome. Processed food has 3 things wrong with it. Low tryptophan. Tryptophan is the precursor to serotonin. So if you have low tryptophan, you're unhappy. And when you get tryptophan, you get happier. And there's data on that. Low omega-3 fatty acids, which are anti-inflammatory, and they stabilize neuronal membranes. Turns out when you look at omega-3 deficient mice, there's an inflammatory haze around their serotonin synaptic boutons, which goes away when you give them the omega-3s back. So they improve their serotonin neurotransmission. And then finally, high sugar, low fiber, because they've added sugar for palatability, and it's addictive and causes metabolic syndrome, and low fiber, which prevents it. That's processed food. So 1/3 of Americans don't know how to cook. And if you don't know how to cook, you're hostage to the food industry for the rest of your life. And that's their goal. That's why they did it. Because now you're a sucker. The real food movement, however, is in high gear around the country, especially in the Bay Area, so we're pretty lucky, okay? But, outside in the Midwest and maybe even here in Bozeman, maybe not so much. Point is, it's only about real food. And I told you that at the beginning, didn't I? Companies who don't change will ultimately be left in the dust unless they buy the startup and kill it, which they're doing. Campbell's Soup actually broke with the Grocery Manufacturers Association, which is a good sign. Cooking is all four at once. It's connecting, it's contributing, it's coping, because you have to be mindful, and it's cooking real food. So sitting down to a home-cooked meal with your family is the single best thing you can do for yourself. But we have lost that because of what? Netflix? Soccer? You name it, okay? You get it. What can we do professionally? 5 modest proposals. Not so easy to do, but also effective. At UCSF, we've gotten rid of sugared beverages off campus. It's called the Healthy Beverage Initiative. You go into our cafeteria, you can't buy a soda. People go, "Where's the soda?" It's a teaching moment. Where were cigarettes banned first? Hospitals. We're supposed to role model for the public. So we've gotten rid of sugared beverages because they're causing this. And at Swedish Hospital in Seattle, they got rid of juice. How about that? Cool. And guess what? The NHS in the UK, sugary drinks will be banned from sale starting in July. And that's due to our work. Proposal number 2. Let's rename type 2 diabetes. No one knows what the hell it means anyway. It's a Greek Egyptian word that means siphon because you're in the bathroom peeing your brains out. Now, did you know that? Let's call it what it is. Oh, you've got processed food disease. I think that might make an impression on you. Proposal number 3. Let's roll back all the subsidies for all the commodity crops that are killing us. Now, there is no economist on the planet that believes in food subsidies because they distort the market. Let the market work. Even libertarians can get on board with that. So people say, wait, if you get rid of all the subsidies, then food will get expensive. So the Giannini Foundation at UC Berkeley actually did this modeling. They did this exercise, and it turns out the only things that would go up, corn and sugar, the 2 things we would want to go up. Everything else would stay the same. That's kind of good. Number 4, our nonprofit trying to jumpstart this real food thing from the bottom up. So if you saw this in a restaurant window, you might say, hey, what they're serving in there can't kill me. Maybe I'll go there. And then the guy across the street would say, hey, I'm losing business to him. Maybe I should do that too. And you start a little movement, okay? And UCSF is Eat Real certified, okay? And finally, let's get sugar off the generally recognized as safe list, because it's not safe. It's toxic. It's toxic and addictive. It is everywhere, and it is killing everyone. And it is bankrupting healthcare, our economy, our society, and it is the gateway to everything else that's wrong. So, a thought. But, this is a heavy lift because there are a lot of people on the other side, a lot of money on the other side. This ain't going to happen anytime soon. So, I hope tonight I have solved the healthcare crisis, solved the Social Security crisis, solved the opioid crisis, solved the depression crisis, and made you happy you came. Thank you.